Peter McIsaac, meet Rod Culleton from Australia. He's standing in the upcoming election. We're going to put this out right on the eve of the election because it's important that the Canadians realise what information Rod is offering to the Australian electorate about how there has been a constitutional rot over the last decades. Before we do that, Peter, could you just introduce yourself to Rod Culleton, say a little about your background, and then, Rod, you do the same for Peter.
Little background on me, Rod. I was a provincial game warden in Nova Scotia on Canada's East Coast for 29 years, professional forest firefighter. I hosted TV series and produced them for 3 years, and I'm a best-selling author. And I wrote a book called The Redneck Conservative, and that's a big middle finger to the left and a handshake to the redneck and all of us.
Yep. It's a brilliant summary. Rod, give me an equal summary on you.
Oh, well, I don't know if I can compete with that. But look, I'm a former federal senator in exile. When I say in exile, not under the Commonwealth powers, but I'm a primary producer. I'm an inventor listed on IP Australia. I'm very proud of that. Revolutionised the small material feed industry. And, I farmed for many years in the upper Great Southern, country boy, country, at heart. You can always take the boy out of the country, but you can never take the country out of the boy. And that's deeply ingrained in me. And that's why I'm fighting to keep family farmers and keep Australia.
That's a brilliant summary too, Peter.
If you need me to come down and help you with the ruse, buddy, I'm your guy.
Well, I was thinking I'm down under, you're up and over, and it's interesting how we're I'm not sure whether I'm over at the moment or under, but anyway, we're communicating, which is great.
It's brilliant, and we're one day out from the election, Rod, where we all hope that you will make it into the Senate. So, Peter, in Australia, there are 2 houses, and the Senate oversees the lower house. So if Rod gets in this sort of semi-independent, he's got a party, the GAT party, but they're a group of independents, as it were. They're not aligned to the rotten 2 wings of the same bird. If he gets in and a group of these independents get in, Peter, they can oversee the legislation coming out of the lower house and stop too much corruption washing over Australia. So pray God they get in. Rod, we are going to put at the end of this clip, this interview, we're going to put your full film. Just tell us a bit about that film so people stay on and watch that. It's just gone out.
Look, I just wanted to, I was offered to make a documentary by Rob Fazzino, and Rob Fazzino was a producer of Hey Hey It's Saturday on Channel 9 for some time ago, which is a very popular Australian TV, and a lot of people remember it, certainly in my generation. But and it was he said it needed to happen because my knowledge needed to be shared in a layman terms, and how kicking back against or doing your job as a federal senator under your sworn constitutional duties. Was to make sure that the country is running and the states are compliant to the laws of the Commonwealth. I mean, that is in the very first page of your Senate manual called Odgers. So Blind Freddie will tell you that that's why you have senators, 12 out of every state. Used to be 2 out of every territory. I think it's down to 1 now. But that's the whole reason why the state sends off senators, to make sure that the laws of the Commonwealth are truly upheld as per what was granted at Federation, when Australia, through its convention, said this will be the deed and the title deeds to call you Australian and run your country. And there is no question about that. Is the founding deed for commerce and trade and how government should be doing so forth. So, so that was a very proud moment for me. But it was very difficult when I gave a public sworn oath to Section 42, where things were written differently, and they wanted a lot of people to take an alternative step, which I, in the Senate manual, it said must take this to put this section, which is swear your allegiance to a British Act. There is no, that you can't step away from that.
Just explain that, Rod. Keep us with you.
Swear your allegiance to British Act. Section 42 says you've got to swear your allegiance to hold your office as a senator to the powers of the United Kingdom. and that is the Commonwealth, and Canada's the same, and
Same thing.
basically not to a piece of legislation that calls it the you would have had Queen of Canada, Queen of Australia. That is not what's in our founding deed. That is a piece of legislation that has created artificial head of power, which basically is, has no juice in it at all. So that was very confronting and difficult for me. And when I had to write the terms of reference to the Royal Commission, I had to have the power of the United Kingdom, the executive power, to invoke the Royal Commission Act of 1902, and to make sure that we were having a bona fide Royal Commission, and that the Prime Minister did hold the executive power. But as it turned out, he wasn't the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia. He was the Prime Minister of the Australian government. So that posed a lot of issues within the Parliament. And I, in a sense, was attacked. There's no question about that. They got stuck into me. I was never constitutionally removed. I was told by the media that I'd turned the place upside down, and rightfully so. I was just applying, what I was told, what was presented to me through my manual. I mean, being a farmer, we look to the manual of how we service one of our tractors or how we calibrate our boom spray or whatever. We look to all of this. So being a concept, as an inventor, I took to it like duck to a water. So once I applied all that, I just had all this whole kickback, and I was prevented going back into Parliament. And that's a really sad thing to have occurred. However, I kept popping up like a 20-gallon drum. You could pull it down so far and it'd come back up to the surface. And that's what we have to do. So we've established a party, established a great team, and we just need to get the balance of power, not worry about who the big players are in the lower house. It's the balance of power. The Senate is the key to the whole us getting back and maintaining our democracy. Yep. And maintaining our freedoms. And that's what I'll do, because that's what the law tells me I have to do. So
now, what's amazing about this, and what's amazing about this, is on the eve of the Australian election, Peter, can you compare what Rod's saying with what's gone on in Canada? You've got a Queen of Canada, and it's been a betrayal of the Commonwealth in Canada as well, as in Australia, as in New Zealand, hasn't it?
So the problem we have now, Rod, is all oaths in Canada, whether it's provincial or federal, they're all sworn to the king, the new king now. So you, like in the United States, where they have a federal republic, you swear an oath to the Constitution. We don't swear that here in Canada. It's the same as, I believe, in Australia. We still swear an oath to the king. And our RCMP, our largest police force, they swear an oath to the king, and so do our military. So nobody in Canada swears an oath to the people who voted them in. So even in the bar, all of our judicial swears an oath to the crown. They don't swear an oath to the people of Canada. So what happens is ultimately, no matter what we find ourselves here in, and whether you find yourself in court or against the government or fighting with the police, ultimately they have no responsibility to the voter in Canada. All of their responsibility in Canada is to the king. And we have legal precedent in Canada. In the mid-1990s, there was a case in Western Canada. It was called the Little Child case, where somebody tried to hold a politician accountable because they had made promises and didn't keep them. And that court case ruled in Canada that you're not responsible for any promises that you make ever to the people who vote you in. Whatever you tell them, you can do and say anything you want, and they're only accountable 4 years later when you have an election. So in the province of Nova Scotia on Canada's east coast, we came up with an idea much like what you're doing, Rod. We started a society here called the Independent Nova Scotia Initiative. We have a small province with 1.1 million people and roughly 670,000 voters. And we had 55 ridings at a provincial level. And our goal was to do what you're doing, but in a different aspect. We wanted to run 55 independents, an independent in every single riding. And what we were going to do is, because here in Canada, once you're a party member, we have something called a party whip. and you don't get to vote on your own. The party says, here's what you're voting for, and then you have to do it. So if you're a really good guy like yourself, good old farm guy, and you go in and your handshake and words still mean something, once you get in, you're told to sit down, shut up, do what you're told to do. Here in Canada, that's the way the party system works.
That's New Zealand too.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to have enough independence that we could control. Look, and all we needed was a dozen. And in a close, if it was a close battle, we wanted enough independence that could control the balance of power. But here's the secret, and here's what really would have made it work, is that we set it up that every independent was going to sign a contract, a performance-based contract with their electorate. They'd put together a committee and some people, and they'd lay out the planks and timelines, and they'd say, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. And if you don't do what you say you're going to do, or do stuff that we tell you not to do, we're going to fire your ass. Mm. And in a parliamentary system, no other place in the world has that. So we had countries all over the world watching what we were going to do. And now we find ourselves in Supreme Court here in Nova Scotia, battling against the government. The problem being is the Supreme Court swears an oath to the king, not to the voter, not to the people. So so the whole idea of independence and what you guys are trying to do will work. But I'm a little late to the game. I wish I could have talked to you 6 months ago, because I can tell you, if you had that contract in place, you'd win hands down. And the reason being, the other parties can't allow it.
Well, can I just give you some good news? That's actually in our candidacy agreements, that they will come out and take a pledge, an oath to Section 42 of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 UK, the British Act, and that they will uphold that to the people. That is their commitment. And this is playing out the same. The intention of the Australian voter is being deprived at the ballot box. And they think that they're getting, bringing in a de jure government, or, the laws of Australia and whatever, but they're not. We've had a divisible, the Crown is indivisible, and there's a lot of talk in Hansard in Australian government, and former Prime Ministers were saying, well, you can't divide the Queen's power artificially, or the King's power artificially. But however, they went ahead with that because large groups like Labor want to become a communist country. So they've abused their powers, because basically they're operating outside in this paradigm. And that's why we have to get the balance of power back into the Senate. And a lot of the Senate, you're right about the whips. The whips are people that basically, hold the whip, really, before, going into the chamber. And they're basically saying, you will do this, you will do that, and do that. And look, I was fortunate in two ways, that when I was with One Nation, and no disrespect to Brian Burston, but, he couldn't get his whip to crack on me, and I just basically went in and applied the law, much to his demise. He was a bit, but basically once I spelt it out to him, I was educating him. I perhaps should have been the whip. So I was holding the whip at the end of the day. So, but you're right. But we have a law, and as you know, they've just come out in 2023 in Canada and passed a piece. I think it's 2022-23, somewhere there. Passed a piece of legislation to bring in King of Canada because you had Queen of Canada before, but this is the paradigm that's operating. The government sets. I've had judges say to me in court, well, Mr. Culleton, you may be very well right, but we have to do what the Parliament tells us what to do. And that's right. If the Parliament's telling them to go down a foreign highway and not go down a Commonwealth highway, what are they supposed to do? It's up to the people to wake up and say, listen, tap on the door of your guys that you've got in Parliament and say, listen, abide by the law. We've put you in there to abide by the law. And this law is this. Currently, we're running without a motor in the ship in Australia. It's just so bad. It's not funny. And that's why we're losing our country.
Yeah, we're in the same boat here in Canada. We just had a prime minister that was virtually installed rather than voted in. We're at the point right now, Rod, where the wealthiest province in Canada may be forced into a situation where they have to separate and break up the Federation of Canada. And with the advent of Mark Carney, who was a globalist WEF climate czar, who just found his way into politics. And he's probably one of those people, if he knocked on your door and you told him not to come in, he could just slide in under a closed door. He's that crazy, right? So he's about as corrupt as a person could be. And we just put him in here as a prime minister to finish off the job the previous prime minister couldn't do. And that's to convert Canada into just a shadow of its former self. So we've got real problems here in Canada right now. And if there's any way at all that we can help educate here tonight some of the people in Australia as to what's coming. So what's your biggest choices down there? Like, who do you have running down in Australia right now? And what's the three biggest issues?
Well, one of the biggest issues is the validity of the 2025 election. That is, there's no piece of legislation passed for King of Australia to give license to give proclamation to a bona fide election, and that's a real issue.
I think Rod, just stop there and really bring people with you. Just exactly how did they carry out this rort in Australia? People think they've got a king that was the way the king was set up originally in the founding documents of Australia, but it's a different king. It's a corporate king, isn't it? Explain this.
Well, it's an artificial king. So if you had a casino on one side of the road and a casino on the other side of the road, and they looked identical, one's operating in license, one doesn't have a license. So
as soon as people start saying sensitive stuff, this happened all night here in Canada, Liz. As soon as people started talking about that, we'd get cut.
Isn't it
it happened with us all night.
Sorry, Rod, we just had you freeze, and Peter and I Peter was saying all night, he's been on different podcasts about the Canadian election, every time sensitive material was spoken about, the podcast, the broadcast froze. So we just had it. He's gone again. Isn't that interesting? And that tells us, Peter, what? Right over target. So are you aware of that you've got in Canada a king that is not the actual, he's not representing what the monarchy is meant to represent for the people? It's the same point you were making. They're not interested in representing the people, these globalist governments. Well,
the problem is right now is in Canada, and I wish Wayne was here because he's a real expert on this, is the reality that it is after 1931, we have some real issues where the legality, but basically right now the government of Canada runs by consent of the people, not by legal documentation. There's sections in the act that go right back over the last 100 years that call into question the validity of virtually almost everything that's happening in Canada right now. But because nobody said anything in the meantime, it's like if you had an empty house next to your place and nobody was living in it, and I move in and nobody kicks me out, and I live there, and my family lives there, and we've been there 100 years, how do you eventually kick me out? I mean, they should have kicked me out right away, but they didn't. Here in Canada, we have a Crown Land Act that if you're a squatter on land for 60 years and you can prove on Crown land that you were there undisturbed for 60 years, they'll give you the land. So we have some real issues here in Canada. And the problem is because we're in an information war, Rod, it's hard to get the actual story out because all of mainstream media in Canada now is fully corrupted and basically financed by our federal government. So it's hard to get out a counter narrative. Even the story that you're telling here right now, if we were trying to broadcast this in Canada, we'd be cut off continually with you trying to tell your story. It's that bad up here.
Well, it's pretty bad down here too, because since 1973, we've basically been a de facto republic. And you've got to remember, a lot of people want to be a republic. They want to depart from the ties of our founding laws. But that becomes a real issue because, in a lot of ways, the media have sort of, pretty much promoted the scheme and dumbed down the population. And I don't mean that by any disrespect. I mean, I didn't know a lot about it when I came until I came a federal senator and actually applied myself pretty well. I've got farmers that are still voting for the National Party here at the federal election and state election. And, they've signed up to net zero to make family farmers extinct by 2050. Yet they're basically, consenting to their own demise. And it's just, I think it's pretty hard to change the mindset of a lot of people, although it is a slow process. But if we can get people on the footy field and apply the law and hold them to account. I mean, I went down in history for an inaugural question to put the monarchy back into the High Court of Australia. I caught the High Court with its pants down, and they've never forgiven me since. But it can be done. You get on the right platform and stand out from the crowd and apply the law. A lot of the people will come with you because that is true leadership, and a lot of people will go with whether it's right or wrong. But if a group of us can just reset the whole, reset the rights, bring back rights, because while you're under a corporate king of Canada or the king of Australia, you only have privileges, and people are having to pay for those privileges. That's why they can't live or whatever. But if we come back under the executive power of the king of Australia, as it doesn't matter what Prince Charles is doing in the United Kingdom, it applies that law, our founding law that sits there, our constitution, and we're signing everything off, and we've got the Commonwealth seal. I mean, they removed the Commonwealth seal without the knowledge of the people. So all we got to do is reset it. You can't. What's the story? If your neck's out, your whole body can't function. We just got to put it back in, and bang, we're functioning again.
You've got too much common sense, buddy, to get yourself elected.
Well, I'll take whatever. I'll take whatever. If they want to dumb me down and it gets me elected, well, do that for the purpose of. How's that sound? So,
Rod, take us back to 73 and just briefly what happened. I will reiterate, people can see it in the movie, a much deeper explanation of this. This is an important connection. Just very briefly, a summary there, Rod.
Well, 1973 was the invoking of the Royal Styles and Title Act, to where they used the executive power, Whitlam used the executive power to create a corporate queen called Queen of Australia. So basically, if you have a corporate queen of Australia, it can't have a successor, an heir and a successor. And we don't come out and dispute that, Queen Elizabeth, if we're under a British Act and we're under our foundation of law, we don't argue that the title automatically goes to the heir and successor of a body politic or proper crown, executive power. We don't argue that. But when they've created a piece of legislation to create a corporate queen, no, there can't be an heir and successor because it's outside the law. And what has happened, and what I pointed out, is that the whole country's running lawless at the moment because there's no motor in the boat. And with no motor in the boat, you can't function the rudder. And that's how Australia's going. And basically, or the best way to say it is the drivetrain's broken. The tail shafts come off the diff, and you got all these politicians pushing the car around, convincing people in Australia that we're still moving forward. And that is not the case at all. So, a lot of I am educating a lot of the federal senators, and that a documentary explains exactly, and a picture speaks 1,000 words, to where we're now getting party leaders like Mike O'Neill and others ringing me up and saying, Rod, we didn't know this had happened. We've got to do something about this. So that's the awareness. So at the end of the day, Australia has been running as a de facto republic outside its law, those governments have been appointing judges, because the judges aren't elected by the people, they get appointed, and basically to do the government's bidding, and it's got to stop. It just cannot keep going, and Canada can't keep going. The Commonwealth can't keep going like this. We're a Commonwealth of nations, and we perhaps, well, not perhaps, now is the time we all got to come together, including New Zealand, because you've got a Queen of
Oh, there it is, Peter. There it is, another freeze. Does this sound very familiar, Peter? Oh, interesting. You both froze then. So there it is. We're being totally ripped off since 1973, when you and I were young people, Rod, all these decades, and they've been ripping us off thoroughly. And in that way, they find a way to serve not the people, but themselves. So just taking it one step further, you could argue that all the laws passed by all these governments in these decades are not valid laws.
Well, it's not us arguing that, it's the law. And if you go to the Acts Interpretation Act, and especially Western Australia, I mean, Western Australia with its own constitution, if a bill's not passed in a magistrate's rightful title, it's void. And if you go to the Acts Interpretation Act of Western Australia, it says that all bills must be passed in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. How can you have an artificial queen under an Australia Act claiming to pass all these legislations? The law says it's void.
Peter, your reaction? I think we've lost Peter as well. Peter, have you got your sound up? There's definitely some interference in here, so it's showing me. It's showing
I don't
me.
know how that happened.
Yeah, it's showing me we're right over target. They're wanting to stop this, and I think we'll leave all the glitches in this interview just so people can see. What's your reaction? Did you hear what Rod said then?
Yeah, so what you're saying there, Raj, Canada's in the exact same situation. Like Canada, we don't have a constitution, we have a charter. And the difference between a charter and a constitution is dramatic, because the charter only applies to land underwater. Because charter is all the law of admiralty. And people don't understand the difference between the law of admiralty and common law. There's a whole series of things. So when we get right down into the basis of this, Wayne continually, Wayne's another one of our ambassadors here with Freedom Train International. He continues to go back and bring up how they solved this problem in Iceland. So Iceland was having a series of problems with the government, and they had a lot of right from the get-go. They were the same situation that Australia is in Canada. And they said, how are we going to solve this situation? And they had what was called the Pots and Pans Rebellion. It was peaceful, but the people all rose up and they said, we have to go back to square one, reestablish a proper government again. They took all the politicians who had created all the debt and all the banksters, and the banks, a bunch of them ended up in jail. They eliminated all their national debt. All the politicians who had created the debt and the banksters were held liable for all the decisions they had made in the destruction of the country. And then I forget, maybe it was in, I don't remember, it was around 2010 or 2012. They just started over from scratch again. And they went back with a new system that rectified all the problems that hadn't been rectified because everybody just continued to kick the broken can down the road. That's what Canada's been doing. And Canada has been basically running since, I believe, the Statute of Westminster in 1931, where someone was given the rights to do something that they didn't have, and legislation was changed, and a mistake was made, and nobody ever went back and rectified the mistake. And everything that flows from that point on, according to many people, they say that, and that's all laws, that's everything, is technically invalid. Now, I'm not a scholar on this, but you have to remember that all the judges that are going to rule on this, right, in regards to this case and everything that we're talking about, he got frozen again. There, you're back. Is that every judge that's going to rule on this has sworn an oath to the king or the crown. It was the queen back then. So what's happening is everything that needs to be fixed the people that are responsible to fix it, it's like if you're a farmer and someone's been rustling your cattle and you have a problem of missing cattle, and now you have to go to the rustlers and ask them, how are we going to fix this problem with the missing cattle? And they're looking at you going, well, you've come to the right people, right? You tell us your problems, Rod, and we'll look after it and we'll get it fixed for you. But therein lies the problem, because here in Canada, we're inside this massive loop that we can't get out of right now. So while we're fighting all the little battles day to day just for survival, no one has gone back and tried to attack the actual war, because when it gets solved, decades of everything that's happened since would be declared invalid. So we're in the same boat that you're in, Rod, and I don't know how we're going to get it fixed up here, but it looks like we're going to find ourselves in a crisis here very shortly and probably see Canada break up. But we had a legal case here in 1998 that allows for the peaceful transition where a person can leave. Well, if you had a territory or one of the areas in Australia and you got enough votes in a referendum, you can actually, in Canada now, there's a framework that you can actually leave and say, no, we're not going to be a part of this anymore. We'll just pack our stuff up and we're out of here. They don't actually leave. But there's a framework right now for, like I say, our most prosperous province that's been getting screwed over pretty hard by our federal government. They're just saying no more. We're not going to take it anymore. And that's underway as we speak. So I really don't know what the situation is, but our goal was to do what you're doing, get enough independence that we could start tabling legislation, unwinding all the mess. And then if we control the balance of power, at that point, we can force the government to deal with different issues that right now they don't have to, because the party doesn't have to do anything. Once you're elected, they can do whatever they want. You can't hold them accountable.
Well, you raise a very good point when you say, there are avenues for referendum. Well, if you're operating outside your law, there are no avenues for a referendum. You can't hold a bona fide referendum. But there's a very good Latin saying. It's called nunc pro tunc. And I'm pretty sure it's now for then or then for now. Don't hold me to that.
Okay.
And that's what we have to do. We have to come back to our foundation. To do that is get on a platform that people can see what we're doing and make it very, bring the awareness to the people that we are doing the right thing and giving true representation. And look, when I put my hand up to be a federal senator for the Australian government, I'm doing it conditionally for the purpose of, I know it's not a senator of the Commonwealth. I know that because I've been there, but I'm doing it conditionally for the purpose of jumping on the field, playing the game, bringing the attention to the Australian people. So when I do kick goals, they actually get on the scoreboard. I can't do it running outside the boundary line. It just doesn't happen. Right. So that's what I'm doing.
And that's what we were trying to do too, because we realized the only way to beat them is at their own game, using their rules against them. He froze up again. Wow.
What a discussion. And the number of times this is freezing. I don't think I've ever had an interview that's frozen as much as this, which tells
I've
me
had so many of them. That is crazy, Liz.
Oh, the censorship.
I don't know if the issue's him or it could be me, but I'm under constant attack.
Oh, it's disgusting, because this is how we'll do it, isn't it? This is Freedom Train International at its heart, Peter. This is the people of the world reaching across boundaries, bubbling up from the ground with the truth and helping one another to know. So I think if Rod does come back, that'll be great. But Peter, I want your advice. We're going to finish. We're going to go to the film. After the Australian election, Rod, we'll get you on again with Peter and Wayne. I know that if you two guys met in person, you'd really like each other. Peter's a great hunter and shooter and fisherman, Rod. So when he comes to Australia, you can host him or vice versa. That'll be nice. But I want your advice right now, Peter, for the people who are going to vote tomorrow in the Australian election, because Canada's election has been stolen by the globalist forces. What can Australia do to make sure that they have good people in there and not the two rotten wings of the same bird, which are Albanese and Peter Dutton? They're just a disaster, both of them.
So here's what happens. Most people believe that by themselves they can't make a difference, but it's millions of people by themselves who can make a difference. and people have to really get up off the couch and go stand up and basically say what needs to be said. And when enough people stand up in a room, everybody starts looking around, and then they get inspired by the few who stood up. And the more that stand up, the more that stand up. And the bigger the crowd, the more the people that show up for it. So what happens is you just need enough people to say, okay, Rod's got some really good points here. Why is nobody talking about this? I don't know how bad you are suppressed down there, Rod. But one of the things is, in where I am in Canada, all of the major legal firms are under, there's a term they use when you hire lawyers on a contingency base, not on a contingency basis, but they're all on standby working for the government. They pay them a minor fee so that when we go to get legal, any legal battles, everybody says, well, we can't help you because we're in a conflict of interest. What you want to look for is you want to look for some serious gung-ho new lawyers down there, young people that are fireballs that want to make a name for themselves, and try to get some of those people on your side, because the game that will be used against you will be lawfare, and they will try to pick you to pieces over what you're trying to do. So that's what we try to do up here in Canada. We got so many people involved in the province where I am that they can't go after us individually because there's too many of us. Right now, if it's just you and not many more like you become too easy of a target. So you just need more of the guys that think like you, right? The average guy who's got a ton of common sense and is not afraid to speak up. Because Australia, once upon a time was just a bunch of warriors down there, right? So where'd they all go? They still got to be down there somewhere. It's time that more people just stood up and say, we're not going to take this anymore. And if they want something to change, something's got to change. My kids had a saying, they used to come to me for stuff all the time, and Dad would say no. And then I'd tell them, don't do this. And then they'd go do it anyway. And then they'd come back to me. It's like if someone comes to you and say, what happened to your hand? Well, I slammed it in a car door. And then you say to them, well, why'd you do that? Well, I wasn't paying attention. And then you say, well, you might not want to do that again. And 3 months later, they come back to you and their hand's all banged up. And you say, what'd you do? Well, I banged my hand in a car door again. And then you'd say, well, how's that working for you? And they'll go, well, not so good. Well, the people in Australia got a chance to take their hand out of the car door and stop slamming it in the door, because they're going to slam it in the same car door and their hand's not going to work anymore. So it's time to do something different. Because if you guys down there keep doing the same different, you're going to end up in the same mess that Canada's in right now. And it's in the process of breaking up.
Wow. Well, I just wanted to say, are you saying seriously, most lawyers in Canada are on retainers to the government, so they cannot serve the people? That's
so
incredible.
Here in the province of Nova Scotia, where I am, virtually all the major firms are on retainer.
That's a shocking corruption of the law.
That's what they do.
It's misuse of government funds. It's so many bad things.
They do it all the time.
Yeah, Rod, when you hear the way Peter talks, you can see how you two would be very aligned. Your reaction to what Peter's saying and your final words on the eve of this election to the Australian people.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that's a conflict of interest, but you got to remember that all the lawyers in Australia are licensed. So they basically do the bidding under their license, because if they don't go along with the agenda, then they lose their license, so they can't practice. And look, we're taking the approach. Look, this is what I'm doing. I'm bringing it in at the legislature level. I'm not interested in what they may claim to be the law. I mean, we were told by lawyers after expensive legal advice that you'll never get your farms back. We're actually applying legislature, and people are going home to their farms unfettered when they were told that they couldn't go back there. The police would put them in jail and for trespass, and they're all going back home to their farms. We're now collectively putting another 5 people back, and we've just proven that everything that the lawyers were telling us was lawful. We're now applying the legislature and applying that test to it, and everything is unlawful. And in actual fact, the lawyers have been complicit to a serious fraud on title in Western Australia, which is about to affect Treasury and, and absolutely compromise and criminalise the torrent system over the accuracy and integrity of the state of...
Froze him again.
Tell you what, Peter, we need to get you and Wayne and Rod on a longer interview. And look out, everybody, for the interview that Rod has just done with Jim Ferguson, of course, who's the founder of Freedom Train International. It's a very, very good interview as well. But isn't it wonderful while Rod comes back, we hope, from all of these freezers? Peter, isn't it wonderful to reach across countries, compare notes?
You can do.
Yeah. So just say that again. You froze again. That was very, very good.
Lawyers are just saying, give up. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. There's a lot we can do. And there's a lot that the parliamentarians should be doing. And they're not doing it. And we're just paying them for nothing to sit there to warm a seat.
Behind the scenes, Rod, I'm going to give Liz some information that you can use. You're going to be able to access a ton of legal data that'll help you out. And it's not going to cost you anything.
All right. It's a pleasure.
It's really nice to link you two. Just a quick final message, Rod. It's the eve of the election. It's Friday here in New Zealand and Australia. Message to the voters.
Well, if you want your country back, vote GAP. Vote Rod Culleton, #1 in the Senate. And I guarantee you, if I get back into that House, I will bring you back a de jure government. I will bring back your rights, forget your privileges, and everyday living. You won't know yourself. The critical mass will come straight off your shoulders, and the monkey that's on your back will throw it in a cage. But feed it and water it for safe being.
So there you go, guys. Everybody down. If you get a chance to vote for this man, go vote for them, because the greatest crisis we have is it wasn't a pandemic. The worst thing that we had was a lack of people with morals. And we had a pandemic of cowardice. This man is neither of those things. Go and vote for someone with a backbone who's willing to stand up, and at least he'll go in and fight for you. And he sounds to me like somebody, you know what, I'm a pretty good judge of character, and so is Liz. This is the kind of guy, if I had up here in Canada, he'd clean house. So this is just what you need down there. So go vote for this guy.
Fantastic final word, and we're going to go out on the film in which Rod's ideas are expounded more deeply, and make sure you watch it. And beyond that, please share it on the eve of the Australian election. Final message to those in charge in this election in Australia: the world is watching, just like it's watching Canada, and you'd better not try the nonsense that's been tried in Canada, because it's only waking up millions more around the world. Thank you very much, both of you men, and go well, Rod, in the election tomorrow.
Thank you,
Nice to meet you, Rod. Best of good fortune.
Nice to meet you too.
I was brought up in the Upper Great Southern Narrogin in Western Australia, and I've always been a country boy and been around farm, rural agribusiness all my life. Got one sister, she still remains in Narrogin, and she took a career in the medical industry, and she's actually pretty much the head matron of the whole Upper Great Southern and Regional District, so she's done very well for herself. My father was a private wool buyer for many years. His father owned a farm. And my mother came off, she was one of 5 sisters, came off a farm in Culleton, which is also more so in the lower Great Southern. And yeah, she was one of 5 sisters, and they all worked on the farm. My parents have been very supportive and got that real country ethics and family commitment. Went to school, Narrogin Senior High School. My parents did try to drop me off to boarding school. The day they dropped me off was the day I left, and then they went to drop me off the very next day, and I left on that day as well. And then they found that they couldn't keep me there. I wanted to go back to the country and be with my friends and be with my family. I've always been very dedicated to Aussie rules footy, played in the waffle. Unfortunately, my career ended early through knee reconstructions. Footy was a big part of my life, certainly country footy. It was something that was well accepted right throughout the region and the community, local communities. Got into politics More so unintentionally would be the best way to describe it. I was witnessing things that I certainly acknowledged that we were all living in Australia, but what was being carried out was un-Australian, and it was that part of the being un-Australian that led me to politics in a sense, because I could see how certain members of the community were being treated by the big end of town. And I, certainly after the global financial crisis, with the way farmers were being dispossessed of their properties, was certainly un-Australian. And it was through that I wrote terms and references to a Senate inquiry at the Novotel Wentworth in Sydney. Those submissions were accepted and I addressed a full bench there. And at that hearing, I was actually commended on the submissions. I was heavily cross-examined by senators, and in particular Senator Wacker-Williams from Inverell for the Nationals, and it was at that presentation, or that Senate inquiry, that Pauline Hanson approached me and said that I needed to run and be a senator for Western Australia and for the farmers. And I basically said to her, you could pay me $1 million and I wouldn't be a political tosser. And from there, things developed and I needed that platform, and basically I accepted the offer from Pauline Hanson. She offered me the portfolio of running a Royal Commission into the rural industry, rural banking, lending facilities, and I accepted the offer. It started off well, and then when I started to really apply the law and the Royal Commission Act to get the executive power in order to have a bona fide Royal Commission, that's where I saw the departure from our real law, which is the executive power which is granted at Federation. And as I kept asking questions and applying that to empower the terms and reference right to Malcolm Turnbull and so forth, that's when I was being confronted with, there was a kickback not only from my party leader but the Attorney General and Malcolm Turnbull himself, which became very concerning to me. Once we're elected as a federal senator, we have to undertake a Senate induction, and that's where we all sit down in a room and the clerk of the Senate addresses us and basically gives us an overview of our history. Now, history was something that I loved at school, and certainly once that constitutional history and the effects of federation and what our war servicemen and women fought for, I absorbed that like a sponge. And I am an inventor. I am listed on IP Australia. So I understand concepts. And once I started reading our Constitution, which is our founding deed of this great nation and the apex law of this, that runs this great country, I was able to understand the concept and followed that concept. And that concept needed a head of power, and that head of power had been removed in 1973 by a new creation of a corporate queen called Queen of Australia. And there are certain sections within the Constitution that grant powers to the Parliament, and there's about 20 sections, and what that requirement is not put in the first covering 9 clauses of the Constitution. So the Parliament does not have power to alter, or a stream can't rise above its source to remove or tamper with the executive power which comes down through the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. Section 128 calls a referendum, so the people must be informed and briefed if there are to be any changes to the Constitution, but that can only be effected between sections 1 and 128. The first 9 covering clauses are unalterable, so they're cast in stone.
I'm Darren Dixon. I'm a researcher for the Great Australian Party. I've been studying constitutional law since 2007. I have continued to study constitutional law and have been assisting Rod and the party with research since 2018 with a good friend of mine, Neil Pitchinen, who is my mentor and good friend, and also involved with the Great Australian Party. So the Constitution is the establishing act for the Commonwealth of Australia. It was established in 1901, the 1st of January, and it's a British act that brings together 6 colonies to become states to unite in one federal indissoluble Commonwealth. The Constitution was created over about a 10 or 12 year period. There were various conventions around the country that established the fundamental principles and the provisions of the Constitution. It was then sent to England, and Queen Victoria, actually provided the royal assent for that particular document, which basically brought it into Australian law. Can the Constitution be changed? Well, if we look to the previous referendum, the voice referendum, most people will understand that it is only the sovereign body of voters within Australia that can change the Constitution. We all come together and we vote for those changes. So fundamentally, it is only the Australian people that can change the Constitution. That is because at Federation, parliamentary sovereignty was thrown overboard, and it was the people of Australia that became sovereign. Now, there is one other way to change the Constitution. In 20 sections of the Constitution, there is a command which says, until the Parliament otherwise provides. And that gives the Parliament a direction to change those particular sections of the Constitution, and they're on subject matters such as the Governor-General's salary and things like that, and the amount of people who can sit in each house. So they are the things that the government can otherwise provide in the Constitution. Essentially, the changes to the Constitution have been occurring since 1926. The Constitution itself does not reflect these changes within its pages. What I'm trying to say is that the Australian people have not been asked for their permission to change the Constitution, and the political parties have been doing these changes fundamentally without any consent of the Australian people.
So on the 29th of August 2016, I sat right in this very place, which I am to understand was at the seat of independent Harradine, a senator from Tasmania. Ironically, it was one day before I took my oath to the Commonwealth of Australia. Above my left shoulder is the crest, the true crest that empowers the House. This is the High Court of Parliament. As you can see here, our reigning monarch sat in the chamber. What I'm standing next here is a replica of crowns of our previous monarchs, but most importantly, to the right of me is the coronation crown, which is the protection of our freedom and rights, and that is displayed right here in this cabinet. Well, it all started in 1953 off memory. That's when the first introduction of a corporate queen started to appear. And then in 1973, there was the Royal Styles and Title Act of 1973, where Gough Whitlam removed the Commonwealth and so the executive power of the United Kingdom, because one has to remember that the Constitution is a British Act. It's a United Kingdom Act. It's an act that's passed by the British Parliament. And he removed the words Commonwealth, so he took away the authority without the awareness being made aware to the Australian people. So basically he removed our sovereignty and our rights and then replaced it with a corporation which can only give you privileges and not rights at all.
In 1973, the Whitlam government brought about a scheme to remove the Crown of the United Kingdom as the authority within the Constitution. And they created a localised Queen. This process began in 1953. In 1952, there was a meeting in London, an economic meeting between all of the representatives of each of the dominions in the Commonwealth. And each of these members decided to divide the crown. So in other words, it was to create a localised crown for that particular place. So all of a sudden, from 1953, instead of there being one indivisible crown over the empire, what we had was an individual crown for each nation. And they created the Queen of Australia, the Queen of Canada, the Queen of New Zealand, and so on. So effectively, they removed the power and authority of the British Crown and they inserted a local power. The question is, what is this power and who is exercising it? Who is the Queen of Australia? Well, fundamentally, there is no Queen of Australia. What there actually is a piece of legislation which creates a title for the Queen to adopt for use in relation to Australia and its territories, that being a geographical location. Previously, the title for the Queen applied to the Commonwealth of Australia, which was the political union of people who united at federation. So one applied to the Union of People of Australia, and the new one applies to the geographical location being Australia. So after the demise of the Queen, we now have King Charles III. To date, the Australian government have failed to create a new title for the King to adopt for use in relation to Australia and its territories. So currently, one would say that we actually don't officially have a head of state. Now, previously, when the crown was indivisible, so there was one monarch over all of the different realms, the monarch ruled absolute. And when the monarch changed from one monarch to the next, the powers and authorities changed also. But now that the king's title has been divided, what we find now is, although the title transfers, fundamentally, for it to be exercised in a local capacity, there has to be a piece of legislation to allow for that. Because it's simple as this: the king clearly cannot adopt his mother's title, because that title is unique to his mother, Queen Elizabeth II.
In effect, what was done was unconstitutional. It was done by the Labor government beyond power, and if it's beyond power, it's void. So, of course, that has an on-flowing effect, because basically now, because we've removed ourselves away from the executive power and we've come out of the Commonwealth, there's no head of power to create a new Royal Styles title for the King of Australia. So the Senate is in a logjam at the moment. They're not trying to bring attention to the public, but basically there's completely no rudder left on the boat because there's no power to do anything. So effectively what's happened is the Parliament has gone off the grid and they've got a little 1 horsepower generator puffing away at the back of the building, purporting to hold power, and it's beyond power. So 1973, once you go out of a law that has been ratified by the Australian people at Federation, and you're not running under that law, you're no longer in a state, you're no longer, you're in no man's land, and that's what's happened to Australia, and that's what I spotted. So there's a serious jurisdictional issue currently playing out at the top end of town.
I call Senator Culleton.
Mr President, I stand here in this chamber today to present my inaugural speech on oath to deliver my message to the Australian people. What follows will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before Almighty God and the people of Australia. I want my actions in this place to reflect my own personal experiences. My inaugural question to the Senate on the 12th of September of this year was to the Honourable Attorney-General and concerned the inconsistencies and the unconstitutional behaviour of our courts. I have started in this place, as I mean to go on, with my inaugural question aiming right at the middle stump on constitutional issues. That question was unprecedented and referred to the High Court Rules Review Committee. It is on notice that Dennis Lilly wasn't the only best bowler to ever come out of Western Australia. Mr President, the hunted has now become the hunter. Australia is not running on all cylinders, and it is desperately in need of a tune-up. To simply put the blue flame out and just simply put it into overdrive. This will be done with the support of my team in Western Australia and those of my colleagues who are prepared to put the best interest of this country first. The reality of Australians today, however, is that the fight is not being carried out on a level playing field. It isn't fair, and the battle is too often against our own governments and those who purport to uphold the laws. For too long in this place, successive governments have defied the Constitution our nation was founded on, and in doing so have ignored their duty of care to the people of Australia. Australians are defenders and upholders of the Constitution and our laws, not a global government pushing UN dictates where undermine our sovereignty. It is long past time for an Oz exit from the UN and removal of all its shackles. Agenda 21 demands such a deregulation or removing the laws that have provided ethical guidance for foreign corporations in this country, adopting the attitude that they can do. Seeing this in our banking institutions. We live in your world, in dealing with their clients, as recent inquiries have exposed and is still being ignored by this government. Did the government take the proposal to a referendum as demanded under the Constitution? No, they did not. It appears that all major parties live in hope that the Australian people will abandon their present democracy and their constitution and let today's politician formulate a new constitution based on the very impost that they already forced on the people of this nation, in breach of our constitutional rights, and all done without the consent of the Australian people through a referendum. When I attended Senate school recently, I was handed a Senate pack which contained a pocket edition of the Australian Constitution with the overviews and notes by the Australian Government Solicitor. Due to certain disgruntled malcontents trying to remove me from the parliamentary poker table through section 44(2) of the Constitution and challenge my validity to stand here today as a senator in section 9 under disqualification, I began to read out and appreciate just what a powerful document our Constitution really is. It is the foundation document of our nation and clearly constitutes the Commonwealth of Australia. As raised in my inaugural question in this chamber, our courts have sidestepped their responsibilities under the Constitution and are currently acting in defiance of the foundation rule of this nation, the Constitution. I stand humbled and honoured to have been elected to this place and make a commitment that I will continue to defend and uphold the Australian Constitution as an elected senator. This nation stands at a minute to midnight, and our obligation to future generations is no less than those who have gone before us and were prepared to do for us.
In Rod's maiden speech to the Parliament, Rod raised the fact that the Queen had been removed from the High Court rules.
Mr President, one question to the Senator, the Honourable George Brandis, QC Attorney General and Leader of the Government in the Senate. Since Senate School, it has come to my attention that there is a discrepancy between Section 33 of the High Court Act 1979, which says that all process shall, which means must, be issued in the name of the Queen, and the High Court rules of 2004. If this appears to be the case, why has the High Court felt free to defy the Parliament for 12 years?
The Leader of the Government in the Senate, the Attorney General, Senator Brandis.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Culleton. Congratulations on your inaugural question in this chamber. Mr Phelan has responded, and he has advised that the High Court's Rules Committee wants to have a look at the question, and that will probably take place at the next meeting of the High Court's Rules Committee in October. If I may say so, Senator Culleton, it is very, very unusual, if not unprecedented, for a senator's question to find its way onto the agenda of the Rules Committee of the High Court of Australia. And I'm sure it is utterly unprecedented for a senator's inaugural question to do so. Thank you, Senator Culleton.
All matters in the High Court must be brought in the monarch's name. They'd completely removed the monarch from the High Court rules, and matters were not being brought in the name of the monarch. Once he raised this question, this was put to constitutional experts and the High Court, and they came back and they said yes. Mr Culleton was correct. They should not have removed the monarch from the High Court rules, and that all matters must be brought in the monarch's name.
Silence, all stand. Please be seated. Silence, all stand. The Court of Disputed Returns is now in session. God save the Queen.
Senator Culleton, it was you who spotted this discrepancy. It was you who spotted the discrepancy in the High Court rules, which the High Court Rules Committee has now acted upon. I might say, since those rules were promulgated in 2004, there have been 16 distinguished Australian jurists sit on the High Court, including 2 Chief Justices. And I must congratulate you, Senator Culleton, on being the first person to spot the problem.
The Constitution is still valid, still real. The Queen is... I interviewed Professor David Flint last Saturday on my show on TNTradio.live. He confirmed that the Constitution is real, it is solid. We're effectively a republic with a president in the form of a Queen that is appointed by our Parliament.
So this sent a spiralling effect upon Rod himself, because he exposed the fraud of these slow incremental steps over time, so gradualism, to change the power and authority and to remove the monarch and to create a de facto republic. Rod, upon exposing this anomaly, set off a crescendo of events that eventually had Rod taken out of the Parliament. So for his exposure of the Parliament removing the Queen from the High Court was to Rod's detriment, because he was not going along with the fundamental plan to remove the monarch and to create a republic.
How did this all come about? Because I wrote the terms of reference to the Royal Commission, you need the executive power. So to have a Royal Commission to have any Royal Commission, you rely on a the Royal Commission Act of 1902, which is 2 years after Federation. And the executive power is derived from the letters patent and from the second clause of the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act, which means the power comes from the Queen or King of the United Kingdom. So, in effect, we all hold a letters patent, and that patent gives us the protection under the Crown and allows us to become bona fide Australians because the law puts us there. It's our founding deed, it's our title deeds to our country. So when there is no power, there is no power. It's as simple as that. So how this all came about, I had to empower a Royal Commission. So I wrote the terms and reference for the Royal Commission. I presented them to Malcolm Turnbull, and I pointed out to Malcolm Turnbull there is a conundrum, and he said, "What is the conundrum?" I said, "It's found at 1A of the Royal Commission Act of 1902. That power is an executive power, but it's only granted to a Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia. It cannot be granted to any other Prime Minister that holds an Australian Parliament. That is beyond power," and that's where the issue started to arise and manifest.
We're not having a banking Royal Commission.
There's nothing more than crass populism seeking to undermine confidence in the banking and financial system.
Malcolm Turnbull was caught between a rock and a hard place because he was put on notice that the whole Parliament was out of jurisdiction, was being run by a corporate queen and not the sovereign queen, that in actual fact all the sitting members, in effect with the Censorship Act of 1948, current sitting members were all sovereign citizens in a jurisdiction not recognised by our foundation law. And once Malcolm Turnbull was made aware of that, he in effect had to step down as a Prime Minister, because once you are of knowledge of a potential wrongdoing, if you act beyond that, then you may be subject to a criminal offence.
A political withdrawal on the banks.
Only the government can ensure that a Royal Commission is created with responsible, comprehensive terms of reference.
Having argued against one for 2 years, voted 22 times to prevent one, and just Tuesday insisted,
We have made it very clear that we are not going to establish a Royal Commission.
Today he did.
Government's policy remains the same until it's changed.
A special cabinet meeting approving the decision after receiving a letter from the big banks requesting an inquiry, what the Treasurer calls
a regrettable but necessary action.
The 12-month inquiry costing $75 million will hear complaints from individuals, businesses, farmers who believe they've been dudded by the banks and decide whether compensation is necessary.
It'll cover the nation's banks, big and small, wealth managers, superannuation providers.
Well, Morrison continued on, but unfortunately I was not on the platform to come back after Christmas break when the Parliament was on its break, and he continued on because basically he hadn't been put on notice. I put the Clerk of the Senate on notice. She stood down. The High Court of Australia was put on notice. The Chief Justice stood down. The Principal Registrar stood down, and it was the match in the grass for getting rid of the dual citizenship within the Parliament. On the 1st of December 2016, with the support of Senator Jackie Lambie, I filed a motion 163 putting the Senate on notice, calling the Attorney General George Brandis and my former party leader Pauline Hanson back to explain how the whole government could run under a corporate title called Queen of Australia and where did it get its power from. Look, they've pretty much kicked back very hard. The Australian Electoral Commission has in effect prevented me from going in a new election without coming out publicly and saying that I'm not qualified to do so, which I certainly rebut that. So I've faced a lot of headwinds and log rolling to try and get there, and a wrongdoing cannot continue on. There has to be a remedy, and law affords that. And if we apply the right law and get within the jurisdiction, we will get victory. Where it sits now is I'll represent myself in the next up and coming election, and I will continue on doing what needs to be done for the best interest of all Australians. I was there for a 3-year period, But just pretty much after 12 months, I was prevented from returning back to Parliament by a president that was not lawfully sitting also, and ended up getting him removed as well. So although it was a real endurance, there was a positive side to it, because as I started to apply the law around my own circumstances, being a federal senator, I was starting to take a lot of scalps with me. And that needed to happen to give awareness to the Australian people. So in 2011, it was declared that no more applications could be made to the Privy Council in the United Kingdom, because Australia was going to deal with its own laws. However, that was just a nonsense. In 2020, I was able to file a High Court application in the United Kingdom. Although the United Kingdom at first, through the registrar in that court of the High Court of Chancery, said, "Oh, Senator Culleton, we cannot hear a matter under Australian law." And I basically came back with the answer. So this is not an Australian law matter, this is a Commonwealth of Australian law matter. And they said, yes, we have jurisdiction to file it. And I successfully filed it, which went against what our government was telling us.
In the late 90s, Kim Beazley said to Parliament that there is a mandate between the United Nations and the Australian government that when a republic is proclaimed, that the Australian government will have power and ownership over our homes, our businesses and our farms. Essentially, this is what the government are working towards. Rod's goal is to stop this. Rod's goal is to bring back rule by the people within Australia, because at the current time, in the current mood, what we see is political parties pushing political party agendas and not the wishes and will of the people of Australia. Some examples of this would be the misinformation, disinformation bill, the removal of manufacturing in Australia over the last 35 years, the digital identification schemes that are being brought in against directors of companies and also against Australian people. Fundamentally, people are being told that unless they adopt these security measures, which we all know are very unsecure, that they cannot access these particular services. So these are just a few of the examples that are happening on a state level as well. The governments are working towards basically criminalising virtually every act that you do. So whether that be on an individual level or on a family level, there seems to be a fine for everything. And this is the direction that the government are taking us.
So I've come down to Colin John's farm in Moondara in Victoria today to follow up on a story that I found out about a couple of years ago with regard to chemicals that are being used on this land. Land where Australian farmers were actually forced purchased to get off their land and out of their farms after farming them for absolutely generations because of the dam for public water. But then what the Victorian government decided to do was import corporations that grow pine forests, and they then subsequently poison the land down here for those pine forests with Grunt 750 and 1080. So today we're going to talk to Colin about how that affects all of the farms that remained.
My name's Colin Brown, third generation farmer at Moondara on Browns Road. Basically surrounding properties around here are blueberries to vineyards to beef farms. We did have spuds, we had all sorts of things here, poultry, we had pigs, we had all sorts. Over the years that I've been farming, I've got an organic blueberry farm to my right hand side across Browns Road as you come into this property. The owners are great people, basically look after their land organically, so they don't use any fertilisers and any sprays. I looked at that 30 years ago and I thought this might be the way that I should probably start to steer myself. So I've used less and less each year. Less fertiliser, less sprays for blackberries and thistles. But what we've got in the Moondara Reservoir, which is run by the state of Victoria again, Gippsland Water, is pine plantation. And the problem that we got with pine plantations, they put fertiliser underneath the pine tree when they plant them. And then usually within the first 12 months, they use a chemical. And that's done via aerial spraying. Aeroplane from out at Leongatha, which is only 30 minutes from here. And they bring these planes in and they start aerial spraying what they call a Grunt 750. Grunt 750 has been used around the world everywhere, but we're one of around about, I do believe, 7 countries that allow it to be used. Is the fact that the reason that they use this Grunt 750 is it's a granulated chemical mixed with water, and then it's sprayed via the aerial spraying that kills everything bar the needled pine tree. So that means your clovers for your bees, that means your ryegrasses, that means your gum trees such as your eucalyptus, your silvertop that we've got around here, your lightning wood, which is as much as blackwoods, any dogwood, blackberry, any sort of life will die other than a pine tree. It's a bit gobsmacking to say, is it the only thing that kills? Well, no, it doesn't. It'll kill bees, it'll kill tadpoles, it'll kill mosquito larvae in a puddle of water. It'll kill basically anything other than the pine tree. For the community and farming, we weren't consulted at all of what chemicals they were using or what they were actually doing or what day it was going to be used.
The Senate is the highest court in the land. It sits with 76 jurors. It sits under the power of the Crown, and the executive power is given to each and every one of those senators elected through the consent and ratification of the Commonwealth voter. And with that, you sit with more power than the High Court, because it is the people that have chosen you who hold the executive power under the Westminster system, whereas a High Court Chief Justice is chosen by the Parliament of the day. A senator can call upon a judge to attend the chamber if there is sufficient evidence of misbehaviour. Perhaps while the Parliament was sitting under the Commonwealth. However, I do not believe there is any executive power in the Australian Constitution to call a chosen judge to an alternative jurisdiction not sitting under the Crown. The Senate is the watchdog, it is the lawmaker, it is the final filter that has to be put before the House in order for any bill to go off to the Governor-General for assent in order to become law. The House of Representatives debate a proposed new law through a bill, and then it is upon that, when consensus is made, it then goes up to the High Court of Parliament in order to make sure that the democratic process has been fully complied with under law and through the executive power. And upon that, it then gets the House of Review and the permission by the High Court of Parliament, being the Senate of the Commonwealth, in order to send that bill back to the House for its departure to go down to the Governor-General for royal assent. We haven't had a Governor-General since 1973. We only have ever had a Governor-General doing business on behalf of an Australian government. So the question is, has there ever been any lawful bill passed since 1973? The law claims it has not. The Parliament hasn't been acting unlawfully, it's been acting without law. To act unlawfully, you would need to come back under the Crown, under the Westminster system, which was ratified at Federation. And the very house that we went in today was established by our forefathers and ratified, being a United Kingdom Act, in order to become law and run this great nation as the Commonwealth of Australia. However, up in what they claim to be the new Parliament House, there is no reference to the Crown or the monarch or the executive power, and that deems it a corporation. And the laws of Westminster do not recognise the Australian government. Jurisdiction, jurisdiction, jurisdiction. It is the first duty of any court and any power of any country. The voter is being deprived of his wills at the ballot box. What we need to do is have all the corflutes put in English, and we must elect a bona fide Commonwealth officer in order to bring the country back under its jurisdiction, run it under the United Kingdom Act, and get the laws and powers and protection through the Crown. The first 9 binding clauses of our United Kingdom Act are set in stone. And there are 20 sections throughout the Constitution that state until the Parliament otherwise provides. And that is not written in the first 9 clauses. Clause 2 of our founding deed and Clause 5, which were all contracted to the Westminster system, makes it very clear the executive power must be the power of the United Kingdom. Sections 1 to 128 and Section 51 are where the Parliament does have power to make law for good order and peace and so forth for under the body politic. Section 128 is where the power vests with the people throughout the Commonwealth in order to call a referendum. No bona fide referendum has ever been held post 1973. Authorised by Rod Culleton for the Great Australian Party, PO Box 8242, South Perth, WA 6151.